Ever had to confront someone older than you and stand your ground?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? In my family, success never earned me a chair at the table, not once. I was the person they called when they needed a resume edited, a contact shared, or a quick transfer to cover some expense they would never admit to. But when it came time for the group photos, the birthdays, the dinners that were supposedly just immediate family, I was always left out. At first, I tried to brush it off with excuses that maybe they forgot, maybe the message never went through, maybe they were overwhelmed with details, and I was just caught in the shuffle. But after years of scrolling through photos where everyone else was tagged, smiling, wrapped up in hugs with captions like, "Family is everything," I realized the truth was simpler and sharper. They just did not want me there. The latest proof landed like a punch. A new photo appeared in the group chat I was not part of, but it still found its way to me because screenshots always do. It was the annual family dinner, the same one I had asked about a week earlier when I called my mom, and she told me they were keeping it small this year. Small apparently meant 30 people, 3 generations, and a cousin's fiancé I had never even met before. I stared at the picture, not at their faces, but at the caption my cousin Megan wrote underneath, "Everyone together again." Everyone. That single word did more damage than the smiles. It wasn't careless. It was a decision. That night, I thought about all the times I played along. I sent flowers to graduations I was not invited to. I mailed a check for Ethan's baby shower, even though I never saw the registry. I even drafted my grandfather's obituary, word for word, because my mom said I had the best way with words. And when it was printed, Ethan's business was linked at the bottom as a family-owned legacy, and my name was not even included as a surviving granddaughter. That was when the pretending began to feel less like survival and more like self-erasure. So when the email from Forbes landed in my inbox, everything clicked into place. It was an embargoed announcement telling me that in 48 hours my name would be published on their 30 under 30 list for tech and impact. The rule was clear: no posts, no leaks until midnight of release day. For once, I had something they could not spin, minimize, or reroute toward Ethan. It was my name, my work, and my face. I kept thinking about Grandma Helen. She was the only one who ever called me just to ask how my day was, not to extract something. She always said she believed I was building something bigger than the family could understand. She wasn't online much, so if I left the announcement to Instagram or LinkedIn, she might never even see it. That is when the idea formed, and it hit me with such certainty that I barely questioned it. If the family loved appearances so much, I would give them one they could not avoid. I contacted a local advertising company and bought a single billboard. The location mattered, right across from Grandma's window. It was the street she looked out onto every morning while drinking her tea. I didn't want confetti. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I just wanted her to see me the way I really was. The design was clean, almost cold. A professional headshot, nothing flashy, and one line underneath, "Guess who's on Forbes 30 under 30? That was it. Not a word about the family, not a jab, not even a hashtag. Just a fact placed directly into her line of sight. People talk about revenge like it has to be cruel, like you have to burn the house down to feel satisfied. For me, this wasn't about flames. It was about turning the light switch on and letting everyone decide if they wanted to keep squinting. Buying that billboard was not cheap, but compared to the money I had sunk over the years into keeping peace, paying for favors, and smoothing over their small oversights, it felt like the cheapest investment I had ever made. The closer I got to the embargo lifting, the more anxious I became. My phone stayed quiet until the final hours, and then it buzzed. The message came from an unknown number. No greeting, no signature, just one sentence: "Take it down before morning, or there will be consequences." I sat with the phone in my hand, staring at those words, and instead of fear I felt something I had not felt in years: clarity. They had always counted on my silence, on my compliance, on me wanting to stay in good standing badly enough to swallow their erasures. This time, I wasn't swallowing anything. I closed my phone, exhaled, and waited for midnight to hit. Because in just a few minutes, the embargo would lift, the list would go live, and the billboard across from Grandma's window would tell the truth they had spent years hiding. And I had no intention of backing down. The billboard had gone up exactly at midnight, the embargo lifted, and within minutes my phone lit up as though I had detonated something in the middle of the family's carefully staged universe. At first it was scattered messages, a cousin asking if I was serious, another tagging me in a comment under the Forbes article as if to confirm it wasn't a prank, but by the time the sun came up, the family group chat, the one I had been excluded from for years, was apparently on fire. Screenshots came flooding in from friends who still had connections with the cousins, and every single line carried the same tone, outrage that I had chosen something as tacky and self-centered as a billboard, followed by the repeated insistence that Grandma was upset. What struck me immediately was how nobody included Grandma's actual words, only their version of them, as if speaking for her carried more authority than letting her speak at all. My phone rang before breakfast, and of course it was my mother. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She started with, "Ava, how could you do something so humiliating to the family?" Her voice carried that clipped sharpness I had known since childhood, the kind she reserved for moments when she wanted to sound like the guardian of dignity while ignoring the reality of the wound underneath. I asked her calmly when Grandma had told her she was upset, and after a pause she said, "Well, Megan said she looked unsettled." That was the entire foundation of their claim. The cousin who curated the group chat like a PR officer had once again delivered the script, and everyone else repeated it without question. I reminded my mother of the obituary I wrote for Grandpa, the one where they conveniently edited me out but kept Ethan's business link intact, and I said that if they were truly concerned about dignity, maybe they could start there. Silence. The irony in all of this was that I hadn't bought the billboard for them at all. I had bought it for Grandma, because she wasn't online and she deserved to see something that wasn't filtered through Megan's captions or my mother's judgment. The family was acting like I had dragged them into scandal when, in truth, the only scandal was that they had spent years pretending I didn't exist while using everything I built to prop up Ethan as their golden example. I could have lashed out, could have posted every screenshot I had saved from years of exclusion, but Sam reminded me of the rule we had built into our company culture: never feed rumors, never argue with spin, just post the facts once. Let them stand on their own and move on. So instead of answering their tantrum, I drafted a single post. It wasn't about the family, it wasn't about revenge, it wasn't even about Forbes and the way people usually use those announcements. It was a thank you note. I wrote that I was proud to share this moment with the teachers who never gave up on me, the colleagues who pushed me to grow, and especially with Grandma, who asked me every single time we spoke what I was building and never once treated my ambition like it was arrogance. I attached a simple screenshot of the embargoed email, not to boast, but to make it clear this wasn't a PR stunt. This was recognition I had earned, verified by an institution they couldn't bend. And then I closed the caption with one line, "Proud to share this with the person who always asked about my day." The reaction was immediate and very different from what the family expected. While they tried to stir anger in the chat, the public comments under my post filled with congratulations, with old classmates chiming in, with mentors sharing their pride. People saw sincerity, not arrogance. By anchoring the story in gratitude instead of conflict, I had stripped the family of their narrative. Their outrage suddenly looked petty, and the silence that followed told me they realized it. Of course, not everyone stayed silent. Within hours, Megan wrote another long post in the group chat, which once again found its way to me, insisting that I had made the family look bad and that public displays of wealth and success aren't what we stand for. She called it brand damaging, as though we were a corporation and not a group of people who shared blood. Then came the shift in tone, the one that revealed their real fear. A cousin who studied law chimed in, writing, "There may be legal implications here, depending on how certain assets were represented." That line was supposed to intimidate me, but instead it told me that the billboard had hit the exact nerve they wanted hidden, the idea that my success was not detached from them, but rather something they had leaned on while publicly pretending I wasn't in the room. And then Ethan reached out directly. His message wasn't long, but it was enough to make me pause. "You built your name off the family," he wrote. "Stop acting like a solo act." Reading those words, I almost laughed, because the inversion of reality was so shameless it bordered on parody. I thought about the early loan I gave him when his business was collapsing, the supplier introductions that I arranged, the late-night calls when he panicked about inventory. I thought about the fact that every single one of those favors had been swept under the rug the moment he stabilized, while the family narrative became that he had built everything from grit and charm. And now, because I had dared to step into the spotlight without asking their permission, suddenly they wanted to claim I had ridden on their coattails. It was a familiar script, but this time I wasn't going to let it stand. I didn't fire back immediately, but I knew exactly what was coming next. The whispers about legal matters weren't random. They were setting up a new front. And if they wanted to play that game, I had receipts they could never bury. The Billboard had done its job, but it wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the opening move. As I put my phone down and tried to collect my thoughts, I could feel the shift inside me. A sense that for the first time in years I wasn't just reacting to their erasure, I was making them react to me. And if they wanted to drag this into questions of ownership and credit, then fine. I was more than ready. Because buried in my files was a piece of paper Ethan had signed years ago, a piece of paper that might not have mattered then, but right now it was about to change everything. When Ethan sent that message about me building my name off the family, I felt the kind of steady heat that does not explode but climbs in a measured way. Because there comes a moment when you realize that you either keep letting people rewrite your life in front of you, or you set the record down somewhere it cannot be edited. And for me that place was a thin folder in my desk that I had carried through 3 apartments and 2 offices, a folder that held the kind of proof nobody expects you to keep because they count on you wanting peace more than you want fairness. Inside that folder sat a signed note from the spring when Ethan's launch was days from falling apart, the week his credit line collapsed, the week I took calls at midnight to calm him down, and then wired him the exact amount he needed to stop the bleeding, with a short, easy sentence he had typed himself promising public credit and a small slice tied to revenue if the season recovered, which it did, spectacularly, and then. He never spoke of the note again except to say later would be a better time, after the brand had a cleaner story, which meant after I disappeared from it completely. I sent Ethan a reply that was calm and very clear, because I wanted the tone to set the boundary before the paperwork did, and I wrote that I was happy to be a solo act if that was the story he wanted for himself, but that the part where I rescued his inventory was not fiction, and that I had a signed document with dates, amounts, and his full name, and that I had no interest in embarrassing him in public if he was willing to correct the record in public himself, by which I meant a straightforward thank you post and repayment of the principal without interest, because I was not trying to profit off our shared blood. I was trying to end a pattern in which I did the lifting while someone else posed for the portrait. I pressed send and waited, and in less than 10 minutes he responded with a wall of text about hustle, loyalty, and how real families do not use contracts, which told me everything I needed to know about how he planned to spin it. And then he topped it off with a story post from the business account implying that some people were all PR and no product, with a laughing reaction that I recognized from years of small humiliations. Sam, who has a talent for stripping drama down to the bone, suggested that we prepare a short letter that laid out the facts without adjectives, the kind of letter that does not shout. It just sits on the table and waits to be read under good lighting. We drafted it in 20 minutes. The date of the transfer, the vendor payments that cleared because of it, the signature on the note, and the clause about public credit or a small equity slice, followed by the options. Either honor the public thank you and repay the principal within a reasonable window, or we file a simple claim in small claims court with a note attached, no interviews, no hashtags, no noise. Before we sent it, I stared at the screen and asked myself the question that matters in every family fight, which is whether the remedy fixes the wound or just satisfies the pain, and I decided that what I wanted was not his money or a slice of his brand. What I wanted was the end of that awful quiet where I had to pretend we both did not know what I had done for him. So I deleted the equity line from the draft and left only the public credit and the principal, because if he could not meet me there, then the story could finally stop pretending to be anything other than what it was. We sent the letter from counsel, because I wanted the boundary to be real, and within an hour the family chat spilled into my messages again with talk about how I was threatening legal action, as if the mere existence of a contract was an act of violence, as if the past few years of being erased were not their own kind of slow harm. My mother called again and asked me not to destroy my brother, and I told her that if she wanted me not to destroy him, she could start by asking him to stop destroying me, and then I added that I had offered him the most generous out anyone could offer, which was a chance to tell the truth himself and close the loop with dignity. She told me families do not keep receipts, and I told her people who get erased learn to keep them, because otherwise they disappear completely. While that conversation churned, the comments under Ethan's dig began to turn, not because I argued, but because I posted exactly one reply with exactly one attachment, a photo of the signed note cropped to show his name, the dates, and the promise, with a line that said I was posting this once and would not discuss it further, and then I closed the app and took a walk around the block because I did not want to become the kind of person who feeds on the churn. When I came back, the noise was different, more cautious, with people asking him why he had said I was all PR if the receipts told another story, and with that shift a space opened where I could breathe, because the point had never been to humiliate him. The point was to make it impossible for anyone to keep pretending I was a ghost. By late afternoon, Sam forwarded me a message that had the dry, careful tone of someone trying to climb down without admitting they had been on a ladder. Which is to say, a note from a lawyerly cousin warning me that airing private agreements could expose me to consequences, and I answered that I had not aired anything private. I had posted a verified document in response to a public claim that impugned my character, and that if anyone wished to test that in a courtroom, I welcomed the clarity of transcripts. That ended the legal bluff for the day, and with the pressure easing I turned back to why I had done any of this in the first place, which was not for the family, not even for Ethan, but for Grandma. Because I wanted her to see that I was not asking for scraps anymore, I was setting terms. In the early evening the phone rang from a number I almost never saw, the landline in Grandma's kitchen, and she spoke in that steady way she always used when something serious needed to be said, telling me that she had heard enough versions of the story to make her head spin and that she would like me to come by tomorrow without anyone else, because there was something she needed to show me about money that was meant for me years ago and never reached me. And while my stomach dropped, I also felt the strange sense that a door I had been knocking on with my knuckles for years had finally unlocked from the inside, because if Grandma was ready to show me what she had, then the real accounting had not even started yet. When I walked out of that call with Grandma, I knew the center of gravity had shifted completely, because once she decided to bring me in, it meant that the story my mother and the cousins had been writing for years was about to lose its anchor. But before I even had time to process what she was going to reveal, the noise in the outside world kept building, and I realized that the only way to survive this war of narratives was not by fighting on their level, with screenshots and whispers, but by stepping so far above it that they would have no way to reach me. That is when I began sketching out an idea that had lived in the back of my head for a while, but had always seemed too bold, too permanent, too final, a scholarship tied to my grandmother's name. Something that would not only make clear where my loyalty really lay, but also ensure that long after these family squabbles faded, her name would be attached to opportunity, not to petty battles over who sat where at a dinner table. The family, of course, had no idea this plan was unfolding. They were still trying to control the conversation through passive-aggressive posts and veiled digs. My mother, who had once sworn she would never embarrass herself by writing essays on Facebook like other parents, suddenly posted a long reflection on the value of humility and how true greatness is quiet. She didn't name me, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Friends forwarded me the comments, some siding with her, many rolling their eyes, and I couldn't help but laugh at the irony of someone who had never once been quiet about Ethan's business suddenly insisting that silence was the highest virtue. It confirmed to me that I was right to change the playing field. The announcement came 2 weeks later. I held a small press event at the high school where Grandma had graduated, where I had spent 4 years walking through halls covered in trophies and plaques, none of which bore my name because I was the quiet kid who worked jobs after school instead of joining every club. I had rented the auditorium, not with flashy banners or expensive catering, but with the school choir singing a few songs and the principal introducing me with more pride than I had ever heard from my own mother. When I took the stage, I spoke not about myself, but about my grandmother, about how every single time I came to her house she would ask me what I was building, not whether I was dating anyone, not whether I was gaining weight, not whether I was settling down, but simply what I was building, as if the act of creating was worthy of respect in itself. Then I unveiled the Helen Collins Promise Scholarship, a fund dedicated to first-generation entrepreneurs and students who were told, like I was, that ambition made them arrogant. The scholarship was not just money, though the endowment was real and large enough to matter. It came with one requirement for every applicant. They had to write an essay answering the question, "Who did you include this year and why?" It was my way of hard-coding into the program the very value the family had denied me, the idea that success is not measured by how many people you leave out, but by who you make room for. It was petty and profound at the same time, and I knew it. Some would see it as a jab, others as wisdom, but to me it was simply the truth turned into policy. When the local press wrote about the event, they framed it as a feel-good story about giving back, but the family understood immediately what it was. A rebranding of the Collins name that cut them out unless they were willing to be associated with the one person they had spent years erasing. My mother didn't even attend the event, which didn't surprise me, but Grandma did, standing beside me at the ribbon cutting, holding my hand as cameras clicked, her face lit up with something between pride and relief. That photo alone was enough to undo years of manipulation, because now the community saw her aligned with me, not with the curated group photos that excluded me. In the days that followed, the cousins scrambled to regain footing. Megan wrote another long group chat message, which of course was screenshotted and sent to me, claiming that I had exploited Grandma's name for my own gain. As if dedicating hundreds of thousands of dollars to strangers was somehow more self-serving than cropping me out of every picture. Ethan tried to post a defensive video about how he had always supported the family quietly, but the comments were brutal, with people asking him why he had never started a scholarship, why he had never given back in any meaningful way, why his version of success seemed to start and end with his own storefront. For once, the crowd didn't buy what he was selling, and I didn't even have to say a word. That week, Grandma called me again, her voice steadier than I had heard it in months. She said she was proud of what I had done, but that she couldn't let me keep walking forward without knowing the full truth. She told me that when I was in high school, there had been a college fund in my name, money set aside from the time I was born, but that during the early years of Ethan's business, my mother had convinced her to release it, promising that Ethan just needed a little boost and that I would be fine on my own. She had objected, she said, but she had been overruled, told that I was the resilient one who would figure things out without help, and she had carried the guilt ever since. I sat with the phone pressed against my ear, feeling the weight of those words sink in. All those years of working multiple jobs, of clawing my way into scholarships and side hustles, of being told that I was too independent, too cold, too detached, while Ethan was showered with praise for his courage, had not been an accident. It had been a choice made on paper, signed and sealed, and now at last revealed. Grandma asked me to come over because she had kept the paperwork tucked away in a folder that no one else knew about, and she wanted me to see it with my own eyes. As I hung up, I realized the scholarship had been my way of rewriting the family's narrative in public, but the truth Grandma was about to show me would rewrite my own history in private. The difference was that one shaped legacy, while the other exposed betrayal. And the closer I came to seeing the papers she held, the more I understood that the final confrontation would not be about billboards or group chats or even scholarships. It would be about who had the right to decide whose future mattered, and whether I was willing to make that fight as permanent as the ink on the page. When I walked into Grandma's living room the next morning, the folder was already sitting on the coffee table, its edges worn and its paper yellowing slightly with time. And she looked at me with the kind of tired honesty that only comes when someone has carried a secret long enough to realize it no longer protects anyone. She pushed the folder toward me and said that inside I would find documents that explained why my path had been so much harder than it should have been, and why no matter how many scholarships I fought for, no matter how many jobs I piled on top of school, it always felt as though the ground beneath me had been stripped away before I even had a chance to stand firmly. I opened the folder slowly, and what I saw made my stomach twist, because it wasn't just notes or vague promises, it was official paperwork tied to a college fund that had been opened for me when I was a child. A fund that was supposed to guarantee that when I turned 18, I could step into my education without fear of debt. But the records showed transfers, signatures, and withdrawals that coincided perfectly with the early years of Ethan's business, with my mother's name on the authorization line. Grandma admitted that she had argued, that she had begged my mother to leave the fund untouched, that she had been told I was strong and independent and didn't need the help, while Ethan was the fragile one who needed the family's full support. She said she had carried the guilt of signing some of those forms herself after being pressured, convinced that it was temporary, that the money would be replaced, that I would never know. Instead, the fund vanished into the launch of Ethan's brand, and I was left to scrape by with nothing but my own stubbornness. Listening to her, I felt a strange mixture of rage and relief, because while the betrayal cut deep, at least now I knew I hadn't been imagining the imbalance all those years. It hadn't been bad luck or personal failure. It had been a choice that they made deliberately, a choice that said Ethan's dreams were worth financing while mine were worth testing against hardship. I could have exploded in that moment, could have sworn that I would drag every single one of them into court, but instead I sat quietly, because the truth was already heavy enough. I didn't need to raise my voice to make it matter. I told Grandma that I forgave her, not because it didn't hurt, but because she had at least chosen to finally tell me the truth. The one person who had consistently asked me what I was building had now given me the missing piece of why I had to build it all alone. That mattered more than any apology from the others ever could. When I left her house, the folder in my bag, I knew exactly what my next move would be. The scholarship I had already announced was strong, but it wasn't permanent. It was still tied to my resources, still dependent on me continuing to fund it year by year. I decided right then to endow it fully, to lock it in with a portion of my recent windfall so large that it would exist long after I was gone, with Grandma's name permanently attached. But I didn't stop there. I added one very specific condition to the paperwork. The family could choose to be listed as honorary advisors, with their names printed on every annual report, but only if they committed in writing to a policy of inclusion. No more cropped-out photos. No more, we kept it small, excuses. No more erasure disguised as tradition. If they failed to uphold it, their names would be quietly removed, and only Grandma's would remain. I didn't announce this condition with fanfare, I didn't leak it to the press, I didn't make it a spectacle. I simply filed it, signed it, and sent the documents to the nonprofit administering the scholarship, with a copy to my mother, Ethan, and Megan. The message that accompanied it was short but deliberate. This is me drawing a line without burning the house. You may walk across it if you choose. It was not a threat, it was an invitation, and that made it more powerful than anything I could have shouted from a stage. For days, the silence was suffocating. Nobody called, nobody messaged, nobody posted another essay about humility. And then, slowly, the cracks began to show. Ethan deleted his story posts, Megan stepped back from her curated group chat updates, and my mother called once more, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it, to say that she had received the documents and understood what they meant. She didn't apologize directly, not in the way I might have wanted, but she said that perhaps it was time to start over, and for the first time in years she asked if I would consider coming to the next holiday dinner. The invitation did arrive, not through gossip or screenshots, but directly addressed to me. I accepted, but on my terms. I arrived late, after the photos had already been taken, and I left early, because I didn't need their performance of togetherness anymore. The only photo I took that night was with Grandma, by the window that had once looked out on my billboard, the two of us side by side, smiling quietly. I sent that photo to the scholarship inbox with the caption, "Add one more to the list of people included this year." Walking away from that evening, I realized that I no longer needed to win every battle. I had already won the war by shifting the frame. They could keep their staged pictures, their curated captions, their illusions of unity. I had built something permanent, something that could not be edited or erased. And if they wanted to be part of it, they would have to live by the very value they had denied me: inclusion. Do you know your true worth? I finally do. Mine was never tied to their approval or their photos. Mine is tied to the frame I built myself, the one that carries my grandmother's name, the one that leaves the door open but refuses to disappear. And that, more than any dinner or any caption, will outlast all of us.